Baby, let me tell you something. Life has a funny way of testing you right when you think you're finally safe. You can walk into a place with steady feet and a calm heart, but one question, one moment, one unexpected voice can turn everything upside down. I didn't know that when I stepped into that building that morning holding my friend's hand trying to help her through something heavy. I didn't know that by the time we reached the security desk my whole world would break open like a cracked window in a storm. But I learned that day that the truth has a way of running after you even when you think you're hiding from it. So listen close, because this story right here, this story changed me. I woke up before the sun that morning thinking it would be a simple day with nothing unusual waiting for me. The world outside was quiet and still, with a soft gray light resting on the streets like a blanket that had not yet been disturbed. I brewed a cup of warm tea and sat at my small kitchen table listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the block. Everything felt peaceful and ordinary, and for a moment I believed the whole day would be gentle. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my friend sent in the shaky hours of the night. She said she needed me to come with her to an appointment at a place she refused to describe. Her words were short and uneven, and I could almost hear her trembling through the screen. She never asked for help like that, and the tone alone was enough to make my chest tighten with worry. So I replied that I was on my way. I did not ask questions, because when someone you care about reaches out in fear, the only right response is yes. I got dressed quickly, pulling on whatever clothes were closest, and grabbed my keys before heading out the door. The air outside had the sharp chill of early morning, and my breath drifted out in small ghostly puffs as I walked toward the car. I kept thinking about her message, replaying her request again and again, trying to understand what could scare her enough to break her normal silence. She was always calm, always collected, always careful with her emotions. So for her to ask me to come with her meant something had cracked through that careful self-control. When I arrived at her house, she was already standing outside, even though I had told her I would knock. She looked smaller than usual, standing there with her arms wrapped around herself and her jacket slightly crooked as if she had thrown it on in a rush. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, and she kept glancing around the street like she expected someone to appear out of the shadows. I wanted to ask what happened. I wanted to reach out and hug her. But there was something in her expression that told me she was holding on to her last bit of strength, and if I asked anything right then she might fall apart. So I simply opened the car door for her and helped her in. She whispered a thank you so faint I almost missed it. The drive was long and quiet. The streets were still mostly empty, with only a few early workers and delivery trucks moving along the quiet roads. Houses passed by in soft colors, and the sky slowly shifted from gray to a pale blue brushstroke. I glanced at her from time to time, hoping she would speak. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles looked pale. Every few minutes she would breathe in with a quick shallow breath, like she was trying to keep herself from shaking. I tried gentle conversation, but she barely responded, only nodding or humming softly, as though even speaking required more strength than she had left. At one stoplight she reached into her bag and pulled it closer to her chest as if protecting it from something unseen. She held it like it contained something precious or dangerous, or both. I watched her fingers tremble against the fabric, and I felt a deep worry press down on my shoulders. Something powerful was happening inside her, something heavy enough to change the way she breathed, the way she moved, the way she looked at the world. The building came into view slowly as we drove down a long stretch of road lined with tall trees whose branches moved slightly in the early breeze. It was a large facility with glass windows that reflected the rising sun in shimmering lines. It looked peaceful on the outside, but there was something about the place that made her body stiffen the moment she saw it. She sat up straighter, almost frozen, and her hand gripped the door handle, though we had not even parked yet. I asked her softly if she was sure she wanted to go inside, and she nodded with a determination that looked more like fear than confidence. She said she had to. Just those two words, nothing more. I found a parking spot near the entrance and turned off the engine. She did not move at first. She stared at the doors of the building as if there were something behind them that only she could see. Something threatening, something unavoidable. I reached over and placed my hand gently on her arm. Her skin felt cold even through her sleeve. I told her she was not alone and that I would stay with her no matter what. She closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength, then nodded again and unbuckled her seatbelt. When we stepped out of the car, she walked quickly, her steps sharp and uneven as though she wanted to get the whole experience over with as fast as possible. She did not wait for me at the curb. She did not speak. She simply moved forward with a strange urgency that tugged at my nerves. I hurried to catch up, walking beside her, though she seemed barely aware of my presence. The lobby was bright and quiet, with clean floors and a faint scent of disinfectant in the air. A few people sat in chairs with clipboards in their hands, and soft music played from a speaker on the wall. Nothing about the room looked threatening, yet she kept glancing around with wide eyes as if expecting danger to jump out from behind the chairs. She held her bag tighter and took a shaky breath. I tried again to ask if she wanted to tell me what was going on, but she shook her head quickly and whispered, "Not now." Her voice cracked on the second word. The guard at the front desk looked up as we approached. I tried to smile to make everything seem normal, but she did not smile back. She simply lowered her gaze and stood close to me as if she needed my shadow to hide inside. I reached for the sign-in sheet, thinking it would help ground us both in something routine, something simple, something boring. But she took half a step back, as if the act of writing her name down would expose her to something terrible. I turned to face her and saw fear flooding her eyes. Not ordinary fear, not nerves. A deep fear that came from something real and close and dangerous. I whispered to her that everything was all right, but I could tell she did not believe it. She whispered that she needed a moment, and then she walked away from me, moving faster than I expected, heading toward the hallway near the restrooms. I watched her go with a growing unease. I thought she only needed a breath of air. I thought she would return in a minute. I thought nothing terrible could happen in a place like that on a quiet morning. I had no idea how wrong I was. She walked ahead of me with a pace that did not match the woman I knew, and every step she took made something inside me twist tighter. Normally she moved with soft, steady confidence, the kind that made you feel safe just standing beside her, but that morning she walked like someone who had been running in her mind for too long. Her shoulders were tense and lifted almost to her ears, and her hands fidgeted with the strap of her bag as though she was afraid it might slip from her fingers. I called her name in a gentle voice, trying not to startle her, but she did not turn, she did not slow, she did not even look over her shoulder. It was as if her fear had swallowed up every sound around her except the frantic rhythm of her own heartbeat. I followed her down the hallway, watching her back rise and fall with hurried breaths. She had always been the kind of person who thought before she acted, who weighed every detail, who waited for the right moment to speak. But that morning there was no patience, no balance, no pause. Her mind was clearly somewhere far away, trapped in a world of what-ifs and shadows I could not see. I kept trying to catch up to her, thinking I could offer comfort or simply remind her she was not alone, but she drifted just out of reach again and again, like she was being pulled by an invisible force that refused to let go. The hallway had a soft hum from the overhead lights, and our footsteps echoed in a slow, uneven rhythm. The walls were lined with quiet posters that no one ever read, and doors to small rooms that felt too silent for a place filled with people. She glanced at every door like she expected one of them to swing open. Her eyes scanned the corners of the hallway, darting back and forth faster than I had ever seen. It was the look of someone who had lived too long with dread. A look of someone who learned to listen for danger even when there was none. I tried again to break the silence with a soft question, asking if she needed a moment, if she wanted to sit down for just a second. She shook her head and kept walking. Her steps grew quicker and sharper, almost frantic. I wondered if she was angry with me, if she thought I would judge her for being afraid, but then I noticed the faint tremble in her hands and realized this had nothing to do with me. Whatever she was facing had burrowed deep into her spirit long before I arrived. She was moving not to escape me, but to escape something she felt closing in behind her. And yet the more she tried to run, the more the fear seemed to tighten around her. It clung to her like a heavy coat she could not take off. She kept touching the wall with her fingertips as though she needed the cold surface to remind herself she was still in her body, still in the hallway, still alive. But her eyes told me she was somewhere else entirely, maybe in a memory, maybe in a moment she had never spoken about. I wanted to reach out and hold her steady, but she was moving too fast for that. She reached an intersection in the hallway and stopped for the first time. Not for comfort, not to breathe, but because she did not know which direction felt safer. She looked left then right then forward again, her movements jerky and desperate. Her face grew pale and the skin under her eyes darkened with exhaustion. She looked lost, not in the physical sense but in the way someone is lost when they no longer trust their own sense of safety. I stepped closer and placed my hand gently on her back, hoping the warmth would ground her even a little. She stiffened at the touch, then exhaled a shaky breath that seemed to carry 1,000 unspoken fears. She did not pull away, but she did not relax either. She stood trembling quietly in that hallway like a fragile branch caught in a wind only she could feel. She finally whispered something so soft I almost missed it. She said she was sorry. Sorry for what she did not say. Sorry for being scared. Sorry for dragging me into something she had not fully explained. Sorry for needing help. The apology carried a weight that told me she had been holding everything inside for a very long time. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, but she shook her head as though the burden was too heavy to be eased by a few gentle words. Then she startled at a sound behind us. It was nothing more than footsteps from someone turning a corner, but she flinched so hard that her bag slipped from her shoulder. She caught it quickly, clutching it to her chest like it was a shield. My heart broke a little when I saw her jaw tighten and her eyes gloss with a fear she did not want me to see. She kept insisting she was fine, yet everything in her body screamed the opposite. She took another deep breath then continued walking, but this time her urgency grew even sharper. She walked not like someone heading toward an appointment but like someone trying to outrun something that had already found her. I noticed she avoided looking at windows' reflections and open doorways. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor ahead of her as though danger might hide in the brightness of any room she allowed herself to glance into. We passed a small waiting area where 2 people sat reading magazines. She slowed just a little, but instead of stopping she scanned their faces with suspicion. Her breathing grew louder and faster and I knew she was fighting the urge to bolt. Something inside her was unraveling in quiet, trembling threads. She had carried herself through life with grace and control, but that morning the threads had begun to snap one by one and she was running out of strength to hold them together. Her steps became uneven and I could hear the soft drag of her shoes on the floor. She was exhausted, drained from fear and from nights of little sleep. She looked like someone who had been hunted in her dreams and woken only to find the fear waiting beside her. I kept walking beside her, ready to catch her if she fell, but she kept pushing forward as though stopping would be the end of her. At one point she reached up to adjust her scarf, but her hands were shaking so badly she dropped one end and let it hang loosely around her neck. She did not fix it. She did not seem to care. Her gaze remained locked ahead on something unseen, something that had captured her mind completely. I kept asking in soft, careful words if she wanted to sit, slow down, drink water, anything at all to help, but she shook her head each time with the same terrified determination. She pressed her back against the wall for a moment, closing her eyes. The wall was cold against her skin, but she leaned into it as if hoping the chill would numb her fear. I stood beside her, quietly letting her breathe, letting her settle, letting her gather the small shards of strength she still had left. Her breaths were thin and rapid and she kept swallowing hard, like she could push her panic back down into her chest. When she opened her eyes again they were darker, more tired, more haunted. She pushed off the wall and continued walking even faster than before. I felt a knot form in my stomach because at that moment I realized she was not herself. Not even close. Something or someone had shaken her to the core and I had been blind to how deep it went. The fear was not momentary. It was layered, old, familiar, and whatever it was she was carrying, she had carried it alone for far too long. As we approached the security desk her pace slowed, not out of calm but out of dread. Her steps turned stiff and hesitant. Her breathing grew shallow again. It was like she knew that reaching that desk meant stepping into something she could no longer run from. The light from the windows reflected softly on her face, showing every tremor in her expression, every shadow in her eyes, every fear she had tried to hide. She looked like she wanted to speak. Her lips parted slightly but no sound came out. She closed her mouth and looked away, her jaw tight with the weight of words she was not ready to release. I felt helpless watching her struggle between fear and the need for help. I wanted to take her hand and promise her that nothing bad would happen. But I could not give her a promise I did not understand. And she could not give me the truth she was too afraid to say. So we reached the desk together, but she stood behind me, not beside me. She lowered her head, pulled her hair forward to hide her face, and folded her arms tightly around her bag. Her whole body shook with quiet, unsteady tremors. I tried once more to ask if she wanted to tell me what was wrong, but she only whispered, "Not here, not now." Then she took a step back, as though the very air around the desk was too heavy for her. I turned forward to handle the sign in hoping it would help settle the moment. It was only when I looked back that I realized she was gone. When the guard looked at me and asked the question, his voice cut through the quiet in a way that made my heartbeat stumble. He said, "Where is the woman who came with you?" And for a moment I stood there confused, because I thought she was just a few steps behind me. I turned around expecting to see her hovering near the wall, or adjusting her bag, or maybe taking one last steadying breath before coming back to the desk. But the hallway behind me was empty. Completely empty. The stillness in that space felt wrong in a way that made my skin prickle. She could not have vanished in the few seconds between my turning toward the sign-in sheet and the guard speaking to me. Yet there was no trace of her. No soft footsteps. No rustle of her coat. No sign that she had ever been beside me at all. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I had missed her slipping into one of the side rooms. I called her name in a low voice, hoping she would answer. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the lights overhead. I looked to the left, where a narrow hallway led toward the restrooms. It was empty. I looked to the right, where a row of chairs sat beneath a wide window. A man sat there flipping through a magazine without paying any attention to me. No one else was there. I stepped forward, slowly scanning each corner of the space, letting my eyes trace every shadow. Fear began to creep up my spine, like an invisible hand pressing icy fingers against my back. The guard stepped out from behind the desk, watching me with a look that carried more concern than suspicion. He repeated his question a little slower, as though he thought I had not heard him the first time. "Where is the woman who came with you?" His voice had an edge of urgency that I had not noticed before. Not loud, not harsh, just precise, careful, alert. It told me that he had seen something I had not. Something that made him uneasy. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice, but it wavered when I answered. I told him she had been right behind me. I told him she had only stepped away for a moment. I told him she must be close. But the guard shook his head. His eyes narrowed slightly as he pointed toward the security monitors mounted on the wall behind the desk. He said she had not passed any of the cameras since the moment we entered. He said he watched us walk through the front doors, then watched me step toward the desk, but she had drifted out of the frame in a way that did not match the natural flow of movement. He said she did not walk to the chairs. She did not go to the elevators. She did not take the hall to the left. She simply moved to the boundary of the camera's view and then disappeared from sight, as though she slipped into a space that should not exist. A strange weight settled in my chest when he said that. The kind of weight that makes your ribs feel too tight for your heart. I tried to explain her fear from earlier, the trembling in her hands, the way she kept glancing at shadows and reflections, the way she walked like she was being pulled by something deep inside. The guard listened without interrupting, but his expression grew more serious with every word. He tapped lightly on the desk as he thought. Then he straightened and told me to stay right where I was. He stepped aside and spoke into his radio using a measured tone that carried no emotion at all. He called for a quick sweep of the nearby halls. He requested someone check the stairwell. He asked for someone to confirm the back corridor was clear. He did all of this in a calm, steady voice, but the way the staff responded told me it was not routine. People moved with purpose. People responded fast. Chairs scraped against the floor. Doors clicked shut. Footsteps echoed through the hall like a rising drumbeat. I stood there, unable to move. My mind kept racing through every possible explanation. Maybe she had panicked and rushed into a restroom. Maybe she had felt faint and sat down somewhere out of view. Maybe she needed space to breathe. But none of those ideas eased the rising panic inside me, because she would not have vanished without a trace. She would not have left me without a word. She would not have walked away knowing how afraid she was. The guard turned back toward me and asked me to describe exactly what she was wearing. He asked about the color of her jacket, the style of her bag, the shoes on her feet, every detail, no matter how small. I repeated everything as clearly as I could, though my voice shook with every attempt to speak. The guard nodded once and relayed the information through his radio. Another voice crackled through the speaker confirming they were searching. I tried to stay calm, but the minutes stretched like hours. Every sound around me felt sharper. Someone walking briskly down the hall made my heart jump. A phone ringing behind the desk felt like a warning bell. I wanted to run. I wanted to search every corner myself. I wanted to call out her name again and again until she answered. But the guard held up a hand telling me to stay put. His eyes were focused on the monitors, his jaw tight with concentration. He rewound the footage and watched us enter. I leaned closer to see the screen. There we were stepping through the front doors side by side. I could see her face though it was small on the monitor. She looked tense, eyes lowered, shoulders tight. Then we walked deeper into the lobby. I recognized the moment she paused behind me. Her hand lifted slightly as if she wanted to reach for me but changed her mind. Then I saw myself step forward toward the desk. She took a half step back. And then she slipped out of the frame so smoothly that it almost looked intentional. Yet her posture told another story. She did not look deliberate. She looked frightened. The guard fast-forwarded half a second at a time. She did not reappear. People passed through the lobby. A delivery worker pushed a cart. A woman walked by with a clipboard. The receptionist returned from a break. But she was nowhere. It was like she had stepped into the air itself and dissolved. A cold sweat formed along my neck. The air felt too thin. I pressed my hand against the desk to steady myself. The guard glanced at me and offered a quiet reassurance, telling me they would find her, that people do not just vanish. But the way he said it made it sound like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. I tried to replay everything in my mind. The moment she stepped away. The fear in her eyes. The trembling in her hands. The way she kept checking every corner. I remembered how she clutched her bag with such intensity. How she breathed like she was drowning in silence. How she refused to explain anything. The more I thought about it, the more I realized she had been slipping away long before she disappeared from the camera. She had been fading into her fear piece by piece until the last piece slipped into a hallway none of us saw. The guard asked me if she had any medical issues that would cause her to panic or faint. I told him no. He asked if she had spoken of fears or threats or anyone following her. I told him she had not said anything, but that her behavior that morning was unlike anything I had ever seen from her. He asked if she had ever gone missing before. The question struck me so hard that I felt my breath catch. I told him she had not, but even as I said it I felt a tremor of doubt. Not because she had disappeared before, but because the fear she carried felt old. Too old for this to be the first time she had tried to vanish. Someone reported through the radio that the stairwell was clear. Another voice said the restrooms were empty. Another said the back hallway had no sign of her. The guard exhaled slowly and looked at me with a deeper concern. People do not vanish in buildings with cameras on every wall. People do not slip away silently without someone noticing. Unless they are desperate. Unless they are terrified. Unless they are running from something they believe is too close to escape. I could feel the tension in the room shift. The staff moved with heightened urgency. The air filled with voices speaking rapidly into radios. A sense of rising pressure pushed against the floor. I knew something was wrong. I knew something had been wrong long before we ever stepped into that building. I knew she had been trying to hide something so heavy she could barely stand under it. And as the guard watched the screen with narrowed eyes, he shook his head and whispered something faint that sent another chill through me. He said she did not disappear. She was taken out of sight on purpose. Chaos erupted in a way that did not match the stillness of the building, and it began not with a loud sound but with a shift in the air so subtle that it made the hairs on my arms stand up before I even understood why. The guard had been staring at the monitors, his eyes darting back and forth between the different angles displayed on the screens, trying to understand how she had slipped out of view, and then something on one of the lower screens flickered. Not a normal flicker from a camera glitch, but a sudden sharp flash that made the guard lean forward with the kind of focus that comes from instinct. He reached for the zoom controls, and the moment he did, 3 voices came through the radio at once, all speaking over each other with urgency that tightened every muscle in my body. Someone said they heard a door slam that should have been locked. Someone said they saw movement in a hallway that no one should have been in. Someone else said they found her bag lying on the floor near a maintenance corridor. The moment the guard heard the word bag, everything inside the lobby shifted. The background music stopped mid-note and the receptionist stood up quickly, eyes wide with confusion as though she too felt something in the atmosphere grow heavy. People who had been sitting quietly a few minutes earlier now looked up, sensing a disruption they could not name. The guard spoke into his radio with quick, deliberate words demanding confirmation, asking for backup, instructing that no one open exterior doors until he gave the signal. His tone was not loud, but it carried a firmness that made every other sound in the room feel distant. I felt my knees weaken. Her bag, the one she had clutched so tightly it had almost become a part of her. The one she guarded like it contained her last piece of safety. The one she refused to open or let out of her sight. If it was on the floor and she was not, then something had torn her away from it. She would never have dropped it willingly. She would never have left it behind. The thought struck through me like a blade made of pure fear. The guard ordered me to stay close to the desk and not move no matter what. The expression in his eyes told me this was no longer a simple missing person situation. He was piecing something together, something he had suspected from the moment she vanished from the cameras, something he had hoped he was wrong about. The weight of that unspoken knowledge pressed into my chest so hard it hurt to breathe. I wanted to run down the hall toward the maintenance corridor. I wanted to scream her name until she answered. But the look in the guard's eyes held me still. He was not trying to control me. He was trying to protect me. 3 guards rushed into the lobby from different directions, each one moving with speed and precision. They spread out, checking corners, scanning hallways, speaking into their radios with clipped tension. Someone said they needed access to the lower level and someone else replied that the lower level was restricted and locked from the inside. That word locked made my fear twist into a sharper shape. If it was locked from the inside, then someone was down there. And if someone was down there with her, then the situation was far darker than anything I had imagined. The guard replayed the footage one more time, zooming in on the moment she slipped out of view. He pressed pause, then enhanced the shadows near the frame's edge. His eyebrows pulled together. He leaned closer until his forehead almost touched the screen. What he saw he did not say, but his entire posture changed. He stood straighter, his jaw tightening, his shoulders squaring as though bracing for something heavy. Then he whispered something into his radio so quietly I barely caught the words. He said code Amber. The effect was immediate. Staff members who had been standing unsure of what to do suddenly moved with purpose. One person locked the front doors. Another began escorting people away from the lobby and into side rooms. A voice over the intercom asked everyone to remain calm and follow instructions. The calmness in the voice was clearly forced. I felt the tension in the air rise like a wave preparing to crash. I asked the guard what code Amber meant, but he did not answer. He only motioned for me to stay low behind the desk. Something in his expression made my stomach twist. He was not frightened, but he was ready. Ready for something most people never see. Ready for something he hoped would not reach the lobby. Another voice came through the radio saying they found traces of movement near the rear mechanical door. A scuff mark on the wall. A slight shift in the dust along the floor. A drop of water that did not match the dry hallway. Little signs that someone had passed through recently. Someone moving quickly. Someone trying not to be seen. The guard nodded sharply as if that confirmed a theory he had already formed. Then the alarm sounded. Not a blaring siren, but a sharp pulsing tone that echoed through the hallways in steady, urgent beats. The lights overhead dimmed slightly while emergency bulbs flickered on along the floor, guiding people toward designated safe areas. It felt surreal, like I had stepped into a different world where the calm of a building could turn into orchestrated panic in seconds. People rushed from the waiting area, guided by staff who used soft, firm voices to keep them calm. Yet even through the controlled instructions I heard the tremble in one woman's voice as she asked what was happening. No one answered her. The guard turned toward me and finally spoke. He said something is not right in this building today. He said she did not simply walk away. He said she was taken, or she was running from someone who knew this building better than any of us. And then he said something that made the floor feel like it shifted beneath me. He said your friend is not just afraid, she is being hunted. My breath caught in my throat. The idea seemed impossible, and yet everything she had done that morning made painful sense. The way she kept checking every corner. The way she flinched at footsteps. The way she clutched her bag. The way she moved like someone trying not to be seen by eyes she felt but could not locate. She had known. She had known something or someone was close. She had known the moment we stepped into the building that she was no longer hidden. And she had said nothing because she did not want to pull anyone into her danger. Someone shouted over the radio. They found her coat. Not the bag. Not her shoes. Her coat. It was lying at the base of a locked door leading down to the utility storage rooms. The guard cursed under his breath something quiet and sharp. He told the others to stay in position and wait for his signal before opening anything. He told them not to touch the coat until he arrived. The fact that a piece of clothing could cause such careful caution made fear spread through me like a cold fire. More guards arrived carrying tools that did not look like they belonged in a peaceful building. One held a crowbar, another carried a flashlight long enough to double as a weapon. A third wore gloves and a harness. They were preparing for something dangerous, something that required force, something that meant the chaos was only beginning. The guard asked me one more time if she had mentioned anyone following her or threatening her. I shook my head helplessly. I felt guilt rise inside me like a tide. She had asked for help but she had not told me why. She had tried to hide her fear but I had seen it. I had felt it, and yet I had not pushed her to speak. I had not demanded the truth. I had thought she just needed company. I had been wrong. The guard told me they needed to open the utility door but they had to do it in a coordinated way. He said if she was behind that door, they needed to reach her before whoever or whatever she was running from did. He gave instructions into the radio then motioned for the armed team to follow him. The hallways buzzed with movement. People whispered. Doors locked automatically. The emergency lights cast long shadows that danced along the walls. I felt powerless standing there listening to the rapid footsteps of people rushing toward the corridor where her coat had been found. Every few seconds the radio crackled with updates that made my heart race faster. They reached the door. They confirmed her coat was there. They found scratches on the metal near the lock. They heard faint movement behind the door. Then everything went silent. The guard spoke softly, movement confirmed behind the door but unclear if hostile or distressed. My blood turned cold. Hostile. Distressed. The fact that they had to clarify which chilled me more deeply than anything else that morning. The guard prepared to give the order and just before he pressed the button on his radio he turned to me again. There was no softness in his expression now, only determination. He said when they open that door whatever is inside will determine everything that happens next. And in that moment I understood why the building had shifted from calm to chaos. Something had found her. Something had cornered her. Something had finally stepped out of the shadows she had been running from. And we were about to face it. The guard kept one hand pressed to his radio as he guided me toward the hallway where they believed the man had gone. Every step echoed with a dull heavy thud that made my pulse jump faster. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the walls felt too narrow, as if the entire building were holding its breath. I kept trying to steady myself but the panic inside me kept rising. I could not understand how a simple morning could turn into something so terrifying so quickly. All I knew was that my friend was missing and a dangerous man was hunting for her, and somehow I had been pulled straight into the center of it. We rounded a corner and saw nothing but a row of closed doors and a few empty chairs lined neatly along the wall. The guard asked if I saw her enter any of the rooms but I could hardly think clearly. My mind kept flashing with memories of her shaking hands, her pale face, her body trembling as she held her bag close as though something inside it mattered more than anything else in the world. I tried to remember the direction she had taken. I tried to picture the exact way her feet had carried her. But my memory felt foggy, as if the fear in the room had reached out and blurred the edges of my thoughts. The guard opened one door after another and looked inside each room with a sharp, careful glance. They were all empty. One room held a few plastic chairs, another held a sink and a stack of small medical supplies. The silence felt heavier with every door we checked. I kept calling her name under my breath, hoping she would answer, hoping she would step out from behind a wall and tell me everything was all right and that I had misunderstood the danger. But the hallway stayed painfully quiet. Then a sudden crash erupted from the far end of the corridor. It sounded like metal hitting the floor, followed by a sharp yelp that twisted my stomach. The guard rushed forward with a speed that surprised me, and I ran after him though my legs felt weak. When we reached the end of the hallway, we found a door swinging slightly as though someone had just pushed through it. A sign next to it read storage. The guard pulled it open and stepped inside with his hand still close to his radio. I hesitated for a moment before following because something deep inside me screamed that whatever was hiding in that room was not safe. Inside, we found a toppled metal shelf and several boxes scattered across the floor. The guard bent down to examine the mess. Something had been knocked over by force, not by accident. I saw a smear on the floor that looked suspiciously like dirt from someone's shoe, and it led toward the back door of the room where a small exit sign glowed faintly overhead. The guard pointed to it and said that whoever was here had tried to escape quickly. I felt a cold chill move through me as I imagined my friend running for her life, trapped in a place she had hoped would give her safety. The guard pushed open the back door and we stepped into a narrow service hallway that smelled of damp concrete and something metallic. The walls were painted a dull gray and the only light came from a flickering bulb that buzzed as if irritated by our presence. The air felt colder here and every sound seemed louder. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I could hear the guard breathing. I could hear distant footsteps, but I could not tell if they were ahead of us or echoing from somewhere else. As we walked deeper into the narrow corridor, I felt the weight of every unknown possibility pressing against my mind. I thought of the man who had been shouting earlier. I thought of his desperate voice as he demanded to know where she was. I thought of the fear in her eyes when she realized she might not be safe even within the walls of that building. I wondered how he had found her. I wondered how long he had been following her. I wondered what he wanted from her and why he seemed prepared to cause so much chaos to get to her. Suddenly the guard held up a hand telling me to stop. I froze in place. The quiet was overwhelming for a moment, and then I heard it too. A faint sound, something like a whimper, something soft and broken. It came from behind a metal door halfway down the hall. The guard moved toward it slowly. I followed, but my legs shook as though they were struggling to hold me up. When we reached the door, the guard called out asking if someone was inside. The sound on the other side stopped abruptly. Then came the sound of something shifting, something dragging. My heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. The guard reached for the handle and opened the door with a firm pull. Inside the room the lights were dim and the space smelled of old dust. My friend was huddled in the corner, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, her arms wrapped around her bag as though it were the only thing keeping her alive. Her hair was messy and strands clung to her damp forehead. Her eyes were wide with fear when she saw us, but the moment she recognized me her expression broke into something even more heartbreaking. Relief mixed with exhaustion, pain mixed with hope. I rushed to her and knelt beside her with tears burning in my eyes. I asked if she was hurt, but she shook her head quickly and whispered that she was only scared. The guard scanned the room and asked if the man had been there. She nodded weakly and pointed toward another door on the opposite side of the room. She whispered that he had tried to force her to leave with him. She said he had grabbed her arm and tried to pull her, but she had fought back and knocked over a shelf to get away. Then she had run into that room and locked herself inside. She said she could hear him pacing outside. She said she could hear him talking to himself, saying he would not leave without the bag she carried. She pulled the bag closer as she mentioned it, as if doing so might protect whatever was inside from anyone who wanted to take it. Before I could ask what she was protecting, we heard a new sound. A loud echoing clang, something metal hitting the ground outside the room. Then footsteps, heavy steps growing louder and faster. The guard told me to stay behind him and he reached for his radio again, his voice firm as he called for backup. I stood in front of my friend, shielding her as best as I could, though fear shook through my entire body. The footsteps grew closer, the air felt thicker, the tension grew sharper. I could feel the moment something shifted in the hallway. It was as if the danger outside that room had decided it was time to break through every barrier between us and it. My friend clutched my sleeve with shaking fingers. She whispered that she was sorry. She whispered that she had never meant to bring me into this. But it was too late to undo anything now. The chaos that had started in the lobby was nothing compared to what was coming next. When the door burst open, the sound tore through the room like thunder and everything spun into a whirlwind of motion, fear and desperation. When the door exploded open, I felt a rush of cold air sweep through the room like the breath of something violent and unseen. The man stood in the doorway, his chest rising and falling in sharp uneven bursts and his eyes wild with a kind of desperation I had never seen before. He looked at my friend, then at the bag in her arms, then at me, as if he needed only a moment to decide who stood in his way. The guard shouted at him to stop and step back, but the man acted as if he did not hear a single word. His whole body leaned forward as though he was prepared to lunge and take what he wanted no matter who tried to block him. My heart thudded against my ribs so hard I could feel the pulse in my throat. I stepped even closer to my friend because I knew I could not let him hurt her even if I did not fully understand why she was being hunted. The guard placed himself between us and the man. He spoke again, his voice firm and steady despite the danger. For a second I thought the man might listen, but then he shouted something that echoed off the concrete walls. His voice cracked with an emotion I could not place. Maybe anger or grief or obsession. His face twisted with a need so fierce it made my stomach twist. He took another step forward and the guard raised his hand telling him to freeze. But nothing about the man suggested he would obey. He moved again, slower this time, almost like an animal stalking prey. My friend let out a soft gasp and the man's eyes flashed toward her. That tiny sound from her seemed to push him toward the edge. He shouted that the bag belonged to him. He shouted that she had stolen it. He shouted that he would not let her walk away with his future. His future. The words hung in the air, heavy and confused. I looked at my friend, asking silently for an explanation. She shook her head, pressing the bag to her chest. Her fear was so deep it shaped her whole body. She whispered that he was lying. She whispered that the bag held proof of something terrible he had done. She whispered that if he got it back, everything she had tried to escape would start all over again. Before I could ask anything else, the man rushed forward. The guard moved to block him and the two collided with a force that sent a loud echo through the room. They wrestled for control, their shoes scraping across the floor. The guard tried to restrain the man, but the man fought with a kind of strength that came from raw desperation. I grabbed my friend's hand and pulled her back toward the far corner of the room. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. She kept looking at the door as if expecting someone else to run inside at any second. The fight grew more violent. The man shoved the guard against the wall with a thud that made the entire room tremble. The guard recovered quickly and grabbed the man's arm, twisting it in an attempt to subdue him. The man shouted again and swung his free arm wildly. I wanted to run to the hallway, but the path was blocked by their struggle. Every option felt impossible. My friend clung to me and whispered that he could not get the bag. She whispered that if he took it, the truth would disappear. She whispered that everything would be lost. I told her we had to move. We had to get help. We had to do something other than hide in a corner. She shook her head, but I pulled her toward the side of the room where a metal cabinet stood slightly open. I searched for anything that could protect us or help free the guard. My hands shook badly as I opened drawers and pushed aside supplies. Most of it was worthless in a fight, but I found a long metal pole that looked like part of a mop handle. I gripped it tightly even though my palms were slick with sweat. I had never fought anyone in my life. I did not know if I had the strength to swing it. But I knew I had to try. The guard was losing ground. The man threw him off balance and the guard stumbled. I shouted his name though I did not even know it. The man turned his attention toward me when he heard my voice. His eyes locked onto the bag again. He took a step in my direction thinking he had an opening. But the guard lunged and grabbed him. They collided again, but this time the man shoved the guard so hard that he fell to his knees. The man pushed past him and charged toward me. Everything inside me screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. I lifted the metal pole with both hands, my arms trembling. The man reached for the bag. My friend screamed. I swung. Not with skill, not with precision, just with the raw instinct to protect someone who trusted me. The pole hit his arm with a sharp metallic clang. He shouted in pain and stepped back, clutching the spot where I had struck him. Rage filled his eyes like fire. He lunged again, but this time as he moved forward the guard tackled him from behind with full force. The impact sent all three of them crashing to the floor. The pole flew from my hands and hit the wall with a ringing sound. I grabbed my friend and pulled her away from the chaos. The guard used his weight to pin the man down. The man struggled wildly, but the guard held tight and shouted into his radio, calling for backup. His voice shook with exhaustion, but he did not give up. He pressed the man's arm to the ground with a strength fueled by duty and fear and urgency. We heard footsteps rushing toward us from the main hallway. More guards burst into the room. They moved quickly, surrounding the man and taking control of his arms and legs. He thrashed and shouted, but they held him down with practiced force. One guard placed hand restraints on him. Another secured his legs. The man yelled that they did not understand. He yelled that everything in that bag belonged to him. He yelled that she had ruined his life. But no one listened. For the first time since the chaos began, the danger started to shrink. My friend collapsed to her knees, shaking so hard she could barely breathe. I knelt beside her and held her close. She whispered that it was over. She whispered that she had been running for months. She whispered that she had been afraid every single day. She whispered that she thought he would catch her before anyone believed her. Her voice cracked with relief and heartbreak. I rubbed her back, trying to soothe her trembling. When the man was finally taken away, the room felt strangely silent. The tension that had filled every corner slowly dissolved. The guard slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. He looked at us with tired eyes and asked if we were safe. I nodded, though my body still shook. My friend nodded too, wiping tears from her face. Her grip on the bag loosened, but she still held it close as though it contained the last piece of her hope. We walked out of the room together. The hallway outside was filled with guards and staff who stared at us with shock and confusion. My friend looked overwhelmed, but she stood a little straighter now. She whispered that she finally felt free. She whispered that she had the evidence she needed to prove everything he had done. She whispered that she would never have survived without someone willing to stay beside her. When we stepped outside, the air felt cleaner than it had all morning. The sun had risen higher and the light warmed my face. I breathed in slowly, letting the fear drain out of my body. My friend took my hand and squeezed it gently. She said thank you in a voice full of gratitude and pain and relief. I squeezed back and told her she was safe now. Truly safe. And that whatever came next, we would face it together. I looked back at the building and felt the weight of everything that had happened inside it. The fear, the chaos, the danger. But I also felt something stronger. A sense of fierce loyalty. A sense of courage I did not know I had. A sense of victory, no matter how fragile. Because in the end she was alive. The truth was protected. And we had walked out of the darkness into the light, still holding on to each other.